While the Athlon XP architecture was less dependent on bandwidth, the bandwidth numbers reached by Intel were well out of range for the Athlon's EV6 bus. Hypothetically, EV6 could have achieved the same bandwidth numbers, but only at speeds unreachable at the time. Intel's higher bandwidth proved useful in benchmarks for streaming operations, and Intel marketing wisely capitalized on this as a tangible improvement over AMD's desktop processors. Northwood 2.4 GHz, 2.6 GHz and 2.8 GHz variants were released on the 21st of May 2003. A 3.2 GHz variant was launched on the 23rd of June 2003 and the final 3.4 GHz version arrived on February 2, 2004. Overclocking early stepping Northwood cores yielded a startling phenomenon. While core voltage approaching 1.7 V and above would often allow substantial additional gains in overclocking headroom, the processor would slowly, over several months or even weeks, become more unstable over time with a degradation in maximum stable clock speed before dying and becoming totally unusable. This became known as sudden Northwood death syndrome, SNDS, which was caused by electromigration. 22. Pentium 4M. Also based on the Northwood core, the mobile Intel Pentium 4 processor, M23, was released on April 23, 2002 and included Intel's speed step and deeper sleep technologies. Intel's naming conventions made it difficult at the time of the processor's release to identify the processor model. There was the Pentium II mobile chip, the mobile Pentium 4M, the mobile Pentium 4, and then just the Pentium M, which itself was based on the Pentium 3 and significantly faster than the former 3. Its TDP is about 35 watts in most applications. This lowered power consumption was due to lowered core voltage, and other features mentioned previously. Unlike the desktop Pentium 4, the Pentium 4M did not feature an integrated heat spreader, IHS, and it operates at a lower voltage. The lower voltage means lower power consumption, and in turn less heat. However, according to Intel specifications, the Pentium 4M had a maximum thermal junction temperature rating of 100 degrees Celsius, approximately 40 degrees higher than the desktop Pentium 4. Mobile Pentium 4. The mobile Intel Pentium 4 processor, 24, was released to address the problem of putting a full desktop Pentium 4 processor into a laptop, which some manufacturers were doing. The mobile Pentium 4 used a 533 mount /SFSB, following the desktop Pentium 4's evolution. Oddly, increasing the bus speed by 133 mount /S, 33 MHz, caused a massive increase in TDPs, as mobile Pentium 4 processors emitted 59.870 W of heat with the hyper-threading variants emitting 66.188 watts. This allowed the mobile Pentium 4 to bridge the gap between the desktop Pentium 4, up to 115 W TDP, and the Pentium 4M, up to 35 W TDP. Northwood, Extreme Edition. In September 2003, at the Intel Developer Forum, the Pentium 4 Extreme Edition, P4e, was announced just over a week before the launch of Athlon 64 and Athlon 64 FX. The design was mostly identical to Pentium 4, to the extent that it would run in the same motherboards, but differed by an added 2 MB of Level 3 cache. It shared the same Gallatin core as the Xeon MP, though in a socket 478 form factor, as opposed to socket 603 for the Xeon MP, and with an 800 mount /S bus, twice as fast as that of the Xeon MP. The first Extreme Edition demoed computer. While Intel maintained that the Extreme Edition was aimed at gamers, critics viewed it as an attempt to steal the Athlon 64's launch thunder, nicknaming it the Emergency Edition. 25, with a price tag of $999. It was also referred to as the Expensive Edition and Extremely Expensive. 26. The added cache generally resulted in a noticeable performance increase in most processor-intensive applications. Multimedia encoding and certain games benefited the most, with the Extreme Edition outperforming the Pentium 4, and even the two Athlon 64 variants, although the lower price and more balanced performance of the Athlon 64, particularly the non-FX version, led to it usually being seen as the better value proposition. Nonetheless, the Extreme Edition did achieve Intel's apparent aim, which was to prevent AMD from being the performance champion with the new Athlon 64, which was winning every single major benchmark over the existing Pentium 4S. In January 2004, a 3.4 GHz version was released for socket 478, and in summer 2004 the CPU was released using the new socket 775. A slight performance increase was achieved in late 2004 by increasing the bus speed from 800 mount/s to 1066 mount/s, resulting in a 3.46 GHz Pentium 4 Extreme Edition. By most metrics, this was on a per-clock basis the fastest single-core net burst processor that was ever produced, even outperforming many of its successor chips, not counting the dual-core Pentium D. Afterwards, the Pentium 4 Extreme Edition was migrated to the Prescott core. The new 3.73 GHz Extreme Edition had the same features as a 6x0 sequence Prescott 2M, but with a 1066 mount/s bus. In practice, however, the 3.73 GHz Pentium 4 Extreme Edition almost always proved to be slower than the 3.46 GHz Pentium 4 Extreme Edition, which is most likely due to the lack of an L3 cache and the longer instruction pipeline. The only advantage the 3.73 GHz Pentium 4 Extreme Edition had over the 3.46 GHz Pentium 4 Extreme Edition was the ability to run 64-bit applications, since all Gallatin-based Pentium 4 Extreme Edition processors lacked the Intel 64 instruction set. Although never a particularly good seller, especially since it was released in a time when AMD was asserting near total dominance in the processor performance race, the Pentium 4 Extreme Edition established a new position within Intel's product line, that of an enthusiast-oriented chip with the highest-end specifications offered by Intel chips, along with unlocked multipliers to allow for easier overclocking. In this role it has since been succeeded by the Pentium Extreme Edition, the extreme version of the dual-core Pentium D. The Core 2 Extreme, the Core i7 and most recently, the Core i9. Contrary to popular belief, however, the Pentium 4 Extreme Edition for socket 478 has a locked multiplier. Only the Pentium Extreme Edition and engineering sample CPUs are unlocked. Prescott. On the 1st of February, 2004, Intel introduced a new core codenamed Prescott. The core used the 90nm process for the first time, which one analyst described as a major reworking of the Pentium 4's microarchitecture. 27. Despite this overhaul, the performance gains were inconsistent. Some programs benefited from Prescott's doubled cache and SSE3 instructions, whereas others were harmed by its longer Pentium 4 2.40 a Prescott pipeline. The Prescott's microarchitecture allowed slightly higher clock speeds, but not nearly as high as Intel had anticipated. Fastest mass-produced Prescott-based Pentium 4S were clocked at 3.8 GHz. While Northwood ultimately achieved clock speeds 70% higher than Willamette, Prescott only scaled 12% beyond Northwood. Prescott's inability to achieve greater clock speeds was attributed to the very high power consumption and heat output of processor. This led to the processor receiving the nickname Press-Hot on forums. 28. In fact, Prescott's power and heat characteristics were only slightly higher than those of Northwood of the same speed and nearly equal to the Gallatin-based Extreme editions. But since those processors had already been operating near the limits of what was considered thermally acceptable, this still posed a major issue. 29. The Prescott Pentium 4 contains 125 million transistors and has a die area of 112 mm. 2. 31. It was fabricated in a 90 nm process with 7 levels of copper interconnect. 31. The process has features such as strained silicon transistors and low-carbon doped silicon oxide, CDO, dielectric, which is also known as organosilicate glass, OSG. 31. The Prescott was first fabricated at the D1C development fab and was later moved to F11X production fab. 31. Originally, Intel released 2 Prescott lines on socket 478, the E-series, with an 800 mount /SFSB and hyper-threading support, and the low-end series, with a 533 mount /SFSB and hyper-threading disabled. LGA775 Prescott CPUs use a rating system, labeling them as the 5XX series. Celeron DS are the 3XX series while Pentium MS are the 7XX series. The LGA775 version of the E-series uses model numbers 5X0, 520, 560, and the LGA775 version of the A-series uses model numbers 5X5 and 5X9, 505, 519. The fastest, the 570J and 571, is clocked at 3.8 GHz. Plans to mass-produce a 4 GHz Pentium 4 were cancelled by Intel in favor of dual-core processors, although some European retailers claimed to be selling a Pentium 4580, clocked at 4 GHz. The E-series Prescott, as well as the low-end 517 and 524, incorporates hyper-threading in order to speed up some processes that use multi-threaded software, such as video editing. The Prescott microarchitecture was designed to support Intel 64. Intel's implementation of the AMD-developed x86-64 64-bit extensions to the x86 architecture, but the initial models shipped with their 64-bit capability disabled. Intel stated that it did not intend to release 64-bit CPUs in retail channels, instead releasing the 64-bit capable F-series to OEMs only. 32. However, they were later made available to the general public as the 5X1 series. A number of low-end Intel 64-enabled Prescotts, with 533 MHz FSP speed, were also released. The E0 stepping of the Prescott series introduced the XD-bit feature. 33. This technology, introduced to the x86 architecture by AMD as NX, no execute, can help prevent certain types of malicious code from exploiting a buffer overflow to get executed. Models supporting XD-bit include the 5X0J and 5X1 series as well as the low-end 5X5J and 5X6. Prescott 2M, Extreme Edition. Intel, by the first quarter of 2005, released a new Prescott core with 6X0 numbering, codenamed Prescott 2M. Prescott 2M is also sometimes known by the name of its Xeon derivative, Irwindale. 34. It features hyper-threading, Intel 64, the XD-bit, EIST, enhanced Intel speed step technology, thermal monitor 2, for processors at 3.6 GHz and above, and 2 MB of L2 cache. However, AnandTech found that this resulted in 17% higher cache latency compared to Prescott, which combined with the lack of consumer targeted programs requiring more cache, largely negated the advantage that added cache introduced. 35. Rather than being a targeted speed boost, the double-size cache was intended to provide the same space and hence performance for 64-bit mode operations. Due to the doubled word size compared to 32-bit mode. On the 14th of November, 2005, Intel released Prescott 2M processors with VT, virtualization technology codenamed Vanderpool, enabled. Intel only released two models of this Prescott 2M category, 662 and 672, running at 3.6 GHz and 3.8 GHz, respectively. 36, 37, Cedar Mill. Pentium 4 height 6513.4 GHz. Final revision of the Pentium 4 was Cedar Mill, released on January 5, 2006. This was a die shrink of the Prescott-based 600 series core to 65 nm with no real feature additions but significantly reduced power consumption. The Cedar Mill is closely linked to the Pentium D Pressler revision, with each Pressler CPU consisting of two Cedar Mill cores on the same chip package. 38. Cedar Mill had a lower heat output than Prescott, with a TDP of 86W. The D0 stepping in late 2006 reduced this to 65 watts. It has a 65 nm core and features the same 31-stage pipeline as Prescott 800 mount /SFSB Intel 64 hyper-threading, but no virtualization technology. As with Prescott 2M, Cedar Mill also has a 2 MB L2 cache. Intel initially announced 4 VTX-enabled Cedar Mill processors with model numbers 633 to 663, 39, but these were later cancelled and replaced by models 631 to 661 without VTX. The extra one added to the model number, distinguishing them from the 90 nm Prescott cores operating at the same frequencies. 40. Cedar Mill processors ranged in frequency from 3.0 to 3.6 GHz, down from 3.8 GHz maximum of the Prescott-based 670 and 672. Overclockers managed to exceed 8 GHz with these processors using liquid nitrogen cooling. 41. The name Cedar Mill refers to Cedar Mill, Oregon, an unincorporated community near Intel's Hillsboro, Oregon facilities. Successor. The original successor to the Pentium 4 was, codenamed, Tejas, which was scheduled for an early mid-2005 release. However, it was cancelled a few months after the release of Prescott due to extremely high TPS. A 2.8 GHz Tejas emitted 150 W of heat, compared to around 80 W for a northward of the same speed, and 100 W for a comparably clocked Prescott, and development on the NetBurst microarchitecture as a whole ceased, with the exception of the dual-core Pentium D, Pentium Extreme Edition and the Cedar Mill-based Pentium 4 height. Since May 2005, Intel has released dual-core processors under the Pentium D and Pentium Extreme Edition brands. These came under the code names Smithfield and Pressler for the 90 nm and 65 nm parts respectively. The real successor to the Pentium 4 brand is the Intel Core 2 brand, which merged with Pentium D, released on the 27th of July 2006. The underlying microarchitecture is the Core microarchitecture, and the first chips implementing it, in 65 nm, are called Conroe. Intel Core 2 processors have been released as single, dual and quad-core processors. Processors implementing the Core microarchitecture were marketed under the Core 2 brand, because processors based on the Yona microarchitecture had already been marketed under the Core brand. See also Intel Celeron, NetBurst based. List of Intel Pentium processors. List of Intel Pentium 4 processors. List of Intel processors. Notes and references.
Good. Finish this. I just downloaded today. It's 6 p.m. 6:10. Yes, that was last edit like yesterday. That's Pentium 4. I think I will like to read it again later. It's 6:10. And I think we can keep the video in 2 parts, so let's do that. So I will start upload, but I will charge the camcorder again, maybe read later, I don't know.